Welcome to this edition of Two Anatomy Geeks. I'm one Anatomy Geek, and my colleague Jill Leary
is another Anatomy Geek.
How are you, friend?
I'm fine.
Awesome. Today we're going to be discussing the pectoralis major. And this is an important muscle because we hear that the pecs are often tight and need to be stretched out. So we're going to talk about the anatomy, the functional anatomy, the attachments of pectoralis major, some of the functions of pectoralis major, and then a very common stretch that people will do for the pecs that actually can create and perpetuate shoulder issues. So I'm going to have Jill start with the functional anatomy and attachments of the pectoralis major.
Yeah, so I'm going to demo here on Dr. Osar, and I'm going to take a look at this right pec major. And pec major is a very broad muscle, kind of has a fan shape to it, and it is pretty much the most superficial muscle on this anterior part of your thoracic cage. So where it's going to originate from is if you find a person's clavicle, that medial aspect of the clavicle, and then it's also going to have origination from the sternum, but the lateral border of the sternum. And then also, because the pec major is such a big muscle, it needs a little bit more to attach to than just those two things. So it also comes off, and it is going to originate from the costal cartilage. Costal refers to the ribs, so that costal cartilage of the ribs 1 through 6. So when you hear about the fibers, like the clavicular fibers versus the sternal fibers, it's just trying to differentiate between those fibers that originate from the clavicle versus those that come off of the sternum. So if you look at the fiber direction of, and there's Dr. Osar's medial clavicle, from here, where those are going to travel out to is the common insertion for the pec major, which is going to be the tubercle, or the ridge of the greater tubercle. And what I think about it, let me hold that there, is that it's really not an area that you can palpate very easily, so I picture just this area from anatomical position on the superior anterior portion of the humerus, so in that area. And then, so that's going to be the clavicular fibers traveling in that direction. And then the sternal fibers are going to come all the way down that lateral border of the sternum. All right. And they are also going to come up and converge onto that same area at that, that crest of the greater tubercle. So that's the fiber direction for pec major. And one of the things I talk about when I teach this in massage therapy school is that the actions of pec major are to concentrically flex the shoulder, internally rotate the shoulder, and adduct the shoulder. And how you can remember that is that when people are trying to show off their pec majors, they do all three of those actions to get it to become bigger.
Awesome.
That's my story about pec major.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So one of the things we hear about pec major is that it's often tight because people work out here so often. Now, is that really a true statement? Well, one of the things you can easily do is you can check out your client's length. So if I have my client bring their arms straight up so the palms are facing each other, the elbow fossa, so the front side of the elbow is facing each other, and now you just come out to the side like this and see how far back they can reach. As you can see, I don't have short, tight pecs. If your client can get beyond 90 degrees, so here's 90 degrees, this is 0, here's 90 degrees of horizontal abduction, this is way past 90 degrees of horizontal abduction, they don't have short, tight pec major. Now, if your client can't get back and they're like this, then maybe they do have short, tight pec majors. So one of the things we often tell or get told to do with our clients is stretch their pecs. However, one of the things that happened to me is, if you know my story, I have bilateral rotator cuff tears, bilateral labral tears on my shoulders. One of the things I got taught to do a lot early on in therapy, and basically this was physical therapy when I went to chiropractic school, and when I went to physical therapy after chiropractic school, is they told me to stretch my pecs, and I would do stretches like this. I'd put my hands on the wall, stretch like this. And all I was really doing was overstretching my anterior joint capsule and my shoulder, I should say my deltoid. I wasn't actually stretching my pec major. And what I did is I overstretched my joint capsule, and that made my joints very my shoulder joints very hypermobile. So if you do have a client that's been told they need to stretch their pec major, here's how we would have him do it. We don't do that very frequently in our office because, again, like I said, most clients have an ability to get their arm back there very easily. It's a pec minor that may be short. We'll talk about that at another time. So if you want to do the doorway stretch, which is a very common stretch for the pec major, here's how a lot of clients will do it, is they'll put their arms in a doorway and they'll just kind of hang through, again, overstretching that anterior joint capsule and that anterior deltoid, not actually stretching their pec major at all. What you want to do is teach your client how to align and stack their head and thoracopelvic cylinder so that way it stays stacked. Then put their arm like this, and then put the arm in the doorway like that. And now what we have them do is breathe in, and as they breathe out, they'll step through, so they're creating that pure horizontal abduction without hypermobilizing the shoulder. They're not bringing the shoulder through, the shoulder stays back, so they're lengthening the fibers, as Jill talked about, across their chest and into their shoulder. They're not hyper-stretching or hypermobilizing their shoulder by overstretching the anterior joint capsule. They'll just hold this position, maintain that alignment, because another thing our clients will often do is they're trying to chest up and trying to lean way through, and all they're really doing is they're bringing their chest up. They're actually not lengthening their pec major. So again, it's one arm, come through, maintain alignment, because as we've talked about in previous episodes, you want to make sure if you're stretching that you're lengthening where your client needs it, not where they don't need it. So great way to lengthen the pec major if your client does need it. However, like I said, make sure you're doing an assessment to determine whether or not your client needs to actually stretch their muscles, and then give them a strategy for effectively lengthening it without overstretching things that are already hypermobile. So this is Dr. Evan Osar with the Institute for Integrative Health and Fitness Education. Hope this served you. Jill and I will be back next week for another Tuesday episode of Two Anatomy Geeks. We'll be talking about the glute medius, I believe, next week. And also, I'll be on with my colleague and friend, Robert Linkul, at Training the Older Adult. So you can register for that webinar. I'll put the link next to this video. It's all about the shoulder. We'll be discussing it an hour long, and we always go long, so it'll probably be more like 75 minutes. We'll talk about the 2 best assessments you can do for the shoulder, not even including the one I just showed you here, but we'll be also talking about 2 of the best corrective exercises to improve the forward shoulder and improve shoulder range of motion. And then we'll go into 3 functional exercise progressions for the shoulder complex. So that way you'll have a variety of exercises, but also you'll have a very systematic approach to addressing the shoulder, from assessments to corrective exercise, and then into the functional conditioning and movement patterns for your clients that struggle with chronic tightness, discomfort, and just can't move their shoulders like the way they need them and or want to. So thanks for joining us. I'll put the link to the webinar next to this video, so wherever you're watching it, you can click on that link, learn more about it. Look forward to seeing you on the webinar. We'll look forward to seeing you back here next week for Two Anatomy Geeks. Make it a great day.